Good evening, universe. Tonight I'm going to be talking all about books 4 through 6 of the School for Good and Evil series, also known as the Camelot years of the School for Good and Evil series. These books are written by Soman Chainani, and I've reviewed the first 3 as well on my channel, so if you haven't seen that already, definitely check it out. I will be using spoilers for books 1 through 3 throughout this video. There's not really too much of a way to avoid that. Probably nothing super specific, but I will be mentioning things that happen in those books. So if you want to avoid that, if you haven't read the books yet, then do that first and then come back. As for spoilers for books 4 through 6, I'll mostly be avoiding those. I will make some vague allusions to some things, but I'll give you a warning before that happens. So obviously, book 4 picks up after book 3, in which Sophie has been made the dean for the School for Evil, and Agatha and Tedros have journeyed off to Camelot so that they can get married and become the new king and queen of good. However, as soon as we get to Agatha's perspective, we find out that there have been a ton of problems throughout Camelot, including a lot of poverty, a lot of unrest, and a lot of people are angry with Tedros. And then there's also this villain running around and harassing and killing people, and he's called the Snake. So essentially what this sets up for is the major problems of books 4 to 6 are going to be getting rid of the snake, as well as fixing all the problems in Camelot and kind of reclaiming Tedros'S honor, because the people of Camelot no longer believe in him as their future king. And one of the reasons for this, again, this is not a spoiler, this comes at the beginning of the book, is that Tedros has been unable to pull Excalibur free. So everybody's kind of doubting him. They don't know what's going on. He hasn't been displaying the most kingly behavior. So he and Agatha want to set out to fix all of these problems in Camelot. Sophie, meanwhile, is bored. And because of that, she is going to join them. And that's essentially her entire reasoning for doing this. So now I'm going to start making specific allusions to things that happen a little bit later on in this series. So if you want to avoid this, then skip ahead to the end of the video. I should have a timestamp somewhere to indicate where I go into my overall kind of summary thoughts that are not going to give anything away. So as I said, Sophie joins Tedros and Agatha pretty much just because she's bored and she sees an opportunity to have an adventure again with Agatha and Tedros. Mostly Agatha. And one of the major things that I didn't like about these 3 books is that Sophie, who was a main character in the first 2 books and is supposed to continue to be a main character in these books, is done a huge disservice, both by the plot and her stake in the plot. There are definitely some ways that she ties into what's going on, especially in the later books, but overall, she didn't really make that much of a difference in my mind. A lot of times she would make a plan or have an idea, but then she doesn't end up doing it because of whatever reason, so it doesn't really matter that she made that plan. Or she learned something or gets some critical bit of information, and this is going to change everything, but then a bunch of other people also get this information, so it doesn't really matter that she has it. There are a lot of times when it feels like she's there and she's doing her Sophie thing, but she's not really integral to the core plot that's going on. And it also seems like she has a lot less at stake than everyone else. Whereas Agatha and Tedros have a lot more on the line. You know, we've got to save Camelot, got to do stuff like that. Sophie doesn't care about that stuff. So it doesn't really super matter to her that she's going along with them. She's only doing that to be with Agatha and have a good time. And while there are, again, some ways in which the plot kind of tries to pull her in and make her more important, I feel that she really didn't reach her full potential, especially considering the ending that we got in book 3 with her was so satisfying and so awesome that I feel like it kind of didn't make sense for her story to continue forward. She also wasn't the only character who I felt was done something of a disservice. The cast in these books is huge. That's always been the case with the School for Good and Evil books. You know, you have the other students, but this takes that and continues even further outward, adding in new characters that we've never met before and bringing them into the plot. So in the previous books, it doesn't follow anybody's perspective really closely. It just kind of like floats around. But in these books, it has a specific character that is stated to be, the point of view. And a lot of times we get point of view characters who are like side characters, or they weren't even introduced in the first 3 books and now they're suddenly here. And that's cool and stuff, but I feel like instead of that, we should have focused in on the characters that we already know, gotten more depth and more growth from them. One of the biggest examples, I would say, of this is Nicola. We get her perspective fairly early on, I think, in the trilogy, and she's there, she's cool, she's very smart, so she's helpful in some ways, but she really seems from the beginning like she's going to play a much larger part throughout the books, and instead she's just kind of introduced, and then like her plotline doesn't really go anywhere of interest or import. That said, there were some characters that I think were really interesting and done really well. For example, I think the antagonists were great foils for Tedros. It's a School for Good and Evil book, so there's more than one antagonist. The multiple antagonists end up complementing and contrasting Tedros in really interesting and illuminating ways. I thought that was cool. You really get a firm ideology with one of the villains about why they're doing what they're doing, what they believe in, that kind of thing. So I did really like one villain over the other, but I thought they were both good and interesting, especially in light of Tedros trying to reclaim his honor. I also really loved the last scene that Clarissa Dovey is in. I thought that was such a great farewell scene. It was so beautiful, so moving. I loved it so much. Definitely one of the standout moments for me. I also really liked the moments of Agatha's and Sophie's friendships as we move throughout the books, especially because it was so tumultuous in the first 3 books. Now, in these books, we really get to see how their friendship balance works. That kind of unerring loyalty between the 2 of them, that ruled. I loved that so much. When it's tested, when things are confusing, or when people are like, Sophie, she's actually evil, she'll always serve herself first. And Agatha continuously standing up for her and being like, no, that's not who Sophie is anymore. I loved those parts. That was great. I also liked the development of Agatha and Tedros'S romance. That was one of the things that didn't really work for me in books 1 through 3, but as we continue throughout the series here, getting to see more of why that works and also seeing them push up against challenges, that was really interesting to me. I do think there are some ways that Chainani could have pushed it a little bit further and really showed how their romance works, but I also recognize that I'm kind of skeptical of some of fictional romances and being like, why do these 2 even like each other? What's going on? So I recognize that some of that is just my bias, but still, I would have liked a little bit more depth there. But also in terms of Tedros and relationships with him that I really liked a lot of his figuring stuff out with his parental figures. As we know from books 1 through 3, he is a really charged relationship with his mom, as well as a complicated one with his dad. That only gets more complicated in these books. And then there's also Lancelot, as well as Merlin, all of these kind of parental or grandfatherly type of figures. The development of Tedros's relationships with all of them I thought was really interesting, often provided a lot more depth to his character, which I felt was a little bit lacking in the first 3 books, so I'm really glad that we had that here. As usual, the twistiness of the adventure, the mystery, figuring out the root of where these villains come from, why they're doing what they're doing, and what's going on in this world overall. That was great. As usual, I loved all of that. If nothing else, these books are always really just fun. They're a fun, wild ride, and they will always have some kind of a twist that you're like, oh, that totally makes sense now, but I never would have seen it coming. So I love that stuff, and as usual, it was pulled off really nicely in these books. So overall, it was a fun read, definitely enjoyable. I read these books while I had to move twice, and that was pretty stressful, but I really enjoyed kind of returning to these books as a safe haven. They were really fun for that sort of thing. It was just disappointing in some parts, especially because of how much I loved the ending of the third book. It felt like these three were a little bit more tacked on, like it was maybe intended to be just the first three books at first, and then he added these three on. I kind of felt it here. It didn't feel like it was originally set up for both arcs. So if you have read the first three books and you're trying to decide whether to continue with the series, I would say if you like Tedros, if you want to see more of Camelot or Merlin or get some more backstory on Arthur and Guinevere, their relationship, if you like that stuff from the first three books, then definitely continue on with the series. This is going to be right up your alley. However, if you want to see more of the school or more of development for Sophie and Agatha, I think it falls a little bit short, especially with Sophie. If you were like me and you really liked the ending that Sophie got in book 3, I would say maybe you're going to be not as satisfied with the continuation of the series. We barely see the school in this. And while Agatha gets back some of the sort of spunk that she had in book 1, I feel like she was also kind of sidelined here. So if you really want more of Sophie and Agatha, you'll get more of that and you'll get more of their friendship and stuff like that. But it doesn't feel as necessary for their character arcs. At least it didn't for me. In some ways, I even feel that their characters not regressed, but moved forward in ways that I was not super a fan of. The ending was also, to me, kind of rough and abrupt. I definitely feel that the book 3 ending was tighter and more satisfying. However, overall, if you're just looking for a fun escapist read and you want to hang out with these characters a little bit longer, then definitely check them out. That's pretty much all I have to say on these books for now. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you read them, if you like them, if you disagree, and have a great night, universe.